room. Your boy Lettuce comes in with a super chat. He says, because of Chad Hall, I have 300% confidence in Gabe becoming an elite number 2. All he does is make plays when Josh asks. And that's going to be something that's super interesting to keep an eye on as well. Number 1, for Gabriel Davis, his weight gained about 15 pounds of muscle. That's shades of David Boston. I don't know if everyone watching knows about David Boston, the former, big shot Arizona Cardinals draft picker. Was it San Diego or Arizona he was drafted to? I think it was Arizona and he ended up with San Diego, but put on a bunch of weight. He was a, stud Ohio State receiver, put on a bunch of weight, too much weight, blew out his knees, didn't have a really great NFL career. All indications are that Gabriel Davis is handling that uptick in weight really well. Eric was hearing some good things about the way Gabriel Davis put on weight this offseason, but just watching him progress and seeing if he can turn himself into an alpha receiver, that's something I'm going to have fun watching as well, because, you go back and you watch the Kansas City game, and Greg Tomset has pointed this out a ton. Stephon Diggs was getting bracketed like crazy. Essentially, the game plan was, let's make Gabriel Davis beat us, and Gabriel Davis beat them. Is Gabriel Davis going to be able to produce when that's not the game plan, when maybe they do start putting 2 guys on him or making him more of a focus of the game plan? So that'll be super interesting as well. What do you think about the outside receiver depth too? Because who's that's another thing that I want to keep my eye on, is who's on the boundary when Diggs and Davis come off the field. Jake Kumaro, Isaiah Hodgins, Khalil Shakir, Marquez Stevenson, Tanner Gentry. I think if you look at the depth chart in totality, the depth at outside receiver might be something that is a concern or something you want to keep an eye on in camp. Am I overreacting here, Dave?
No, I don't think you're overreacting, because I think when we think about the group as a whole, you talk about, well, Jamison Crowder, yes, he plays inside and out, but you primarily think of him as a slot guy. Khalil Shakir played inside and out in college. When we drafted him, we believe the long-term fit for him is probably in the slot. Does that leave an opportunity for a guy like Jake Kumaro to be on the outside? Does it leave an opportunity for a guy like Marquez Stevenson to get some outside reps, which we know he has one element in this group that pretty much none of the rest of the guys do, and that's that deep down the field speed. If he can prove that he can be a legitimate factor on the outside, that could be a path for him to making this team. So every time we kind of talk about this, it kind of, for me, I keep telling myself, like, man, how many different places and different opportunities does Marquez Stevenson have to make this team? He's going to have a lot of chances to kind of prove that he's capable in multiple roles, whether it's kick returning, maybe on the outside, on the boundary. But, outside of Davis and Diggs, there's not a ton there, right? You have Kumaro, who is clearly an outside guy. And then it's a little bit of a bunch of guys who can maybe do a little bit of both inside and outside. So maybe that's a good thing, but maybe that's something where the Bills have to look and they have to say, like, who's legitimately going to be that third guy that we can play on the outside.
Yeah, and Chris Jenke comes in and says, what do you guys think is the likelihood the Bills keep 7 wide receivers on the 53? I think that's completely up to how well Isaiah Hodgins and Marquez Stevenson play in the preseason. I don't think Marquez Stevenson was making this roster last year if he didn't return that punt in the preseason. I think that got a lot of people's attention and therefore made the Buffalo Bills feel like, well, they ended up, stashing him with that injury. But I think that was one of the reasons why the Bills felt like they couldn't risk him to the practice squad. If Isaiah Hodgins or Marquez Stevenson do that in the preseason, I think you could see the Buffalo Bills carry 7. But my sleeper wide receiver is because he can play 4 phases of special teams. At least last year in the preseason, he was one of the first guys off the bench in boundary situations. I think a lot of people are sleeping on maybe an increased role for Jake Kumaro this year, or at least an increased role for Jake Kumaro if somebody goes down. Like Jake Kumaro might be, if Diggs or Davis goes down, it could be Jake Kumaro who is the first call off the bench, as opposed to last year where it would have been Gabriel Davis as the first call off the bench. So I think we might be sleeping a little bit on Jake Kumaro there. A couple of people have come into the comment section too. We talked about boundary receivers, but we haven't really talked about like the slot guys. And they came in and someone mentioned, could Tavon Austin play on the outside? And then Chris Jenke just came in and said, what about Jamison Crowder taking reps at the boundary? The number one issue I have is if you think back to 2019, Josh Allen's second year, you had John Brown on the outside, who Josh Allen had a really good rapport with. You had Cole Beasley in the slot, and then Robert Foster kind of fell off a cliff. And there wasn't really a true secondary boundary receiver on that football team in 2019. And I understand that Josh hadn't fully developed yet and he was still growing as a quarterback, but I do feel like that limited the offense and what the offense could do. And you saw a lot of trick plays and you saw a lot of different things that the Buffalo Bills did to try to work the ball down the field and generate some offense because they just didn't have a second boundary receiver who could, win his reps and be successful. So to me, I do not think you want to force a slot guy to the boundary. I don't think Jamison Crowder has that flex. I know Isaiah McKenzie doesn't have that flex. And Tavon Austin, to me, he's just too small. And Chris Jenke says in 2019 it was between Duke and Mackenzie Beasley on the outside. There was Robert Foster sprinkled in there. It was Duke Williams. I don't remember them ever really trying Cole Beasley on the boundary. He was more of the slot guy. And then they did have St. Jones for half the year. St. Jones has developed more into a slot receiver or a Z receiver too. I guess he plays the boundary. So I think those guys are more slot guys, but that still does bring up a good question. Like, how do the Buffalo Bills, one of the things to keep an eye on at training camp, how do they manage the reps for the slot receivers? Because this team is chock full of slot/gadget receivers. You got Jamison Crowder. You have Isaiah McKenzie. You have Khalil Shakir, who I still have hopes can play on the boundary. But going back and watching a ton of his college tape, just not a lot of separation. And when guys don't get a lot of separation in college, it does not bode well for their ability to a lot of contested catches for Khalil Shakir. So to me, that makes me think he's more of a slot guy in the NFL, who wins with his short area quickness and things like that to get open over the middle as opposed to working the boundary. And then a guy like Tavon Austin. So a lot of quality, or at least high potential, in my opinion, slot players. How do the Buffalo Bills manage those slot reps, and what are you going to be keeping an eye on for? I think Stevenson's a boundary guy. I don't even think Stevenson's a slot guy. He's too frail for the inside.
Well, I think just numbers wise, they need to put him on the outside anyway, right? Because they need someone to be that like number 3 and 4. Like I would imagine it's going to be Diggs, Davis as the starters, and then it'll probably be Kumaro and Stevenson as the next 2 in on the outside. I think from the slot, you're going to have Crowder there, obviously, I think taking the first team reps. And then I think second team reps initially are going to be Isaiah McKenzie. I think that it would be a little bit presumptuous to assume that Shakir is going to come in right away and take second team reps from the slot from day one. Now, I'm not saying that he can't get to that point at some point during training camp or as the preseason progresses, but I do think initially the way the reps will shake out is that it'll be Crowder taking the first team reps in the slot, followed by McKenzie, followed by Shakir. That would be my prediction right now. And there'll be plenty of reps to go. I mean, like, this is a situation that I think the Bills find themselves sort of in the opposite of where they had been in the Cole Beasley era, right? It was like really without Cole Beasley, the Bills didn't have a great backup slot situation without Cole Beasley in years past. It was Isaiah McKenzie, right? Was kind of the guy. And now you bring in 2 other dudes, Crowder and Shakir, to kind of, round out that slot, that slot position here. So Bills find themselves in an interesting situation where it seems like, at least from the slot receiver perspective, they've got better depth there. Not to mention, we have seen Gabe Davis play out of the slot if need be. And obviously, we know Stephon Diggs can go anywhere. So I don't think slot is going to be an issue for the Bills this year. And but I do think Crowder 1, McKenzie 2, and Shakir 3 to start out at least.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at it and I just sort of jotted down in my notes. I thought to myself as you were talking, I was like, what do I want to see in 11 personnel as training camp rolls out? So like first team 11 personnel, second team 11 personnel, third team 11 personnel. I think in an ideal world, what would get me the most giddy, which would make me the most happy, is if the first team 11 personnel was Diggs, Davis, Crowder. I think that's obvious. I think that's what most fans want to see. I think second team, I think fans want other guys to be in these slots, but I think that it's going to take some time for guys like Hodgins to earn their way up. But to me, I think second team 11 personnel would be Jake Kumaro and Khalil Shakir on the boundary, Isaiah McKenzie in the slot, and then third team, Stevenson Hodgins on the boundary, and Shakir then moves into the slot and works in, and he gets those boundary reps and he gets those slot reps. That's to me in an ideal world what I
Makes
would
sense.
like to see.
I mean, yeah.
And Jason Taylor comes in with an interesting comment. He says Joe Marino seems to think that Shakir will have no offensive impact this season, maybe special teams. I mean, if by season's end Khalil Shakir was a guy lower on the depth chart that was break class in case of emergency, that never saw the field because no one ever got hurt, but also contributed as the kick and punt returner, I'm fine with that. Like for his rookie year, like he did slip to the 5th round for a reason. So even though this show, we spent a good amount of time on this show talking about him as a potential 3rd rounder, that's the sort of, that's the sort of feelings we have about Khalil Shakir. The reality is the NFL saw him as a 5th rounder. And it's not often that you see a 5th round receiver step in day one and contribute offensively, even as a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 4. Has it happened before? I'm sure it has, because I'm going off the top of my head here. I don't have any sort of, notes on that in front of me. But if Khalil Shakir is mostly just a guy who practices this year and contributes a little bit, like on special teams, I think that I'm completely okay with that, because I think his contribution, Jamison Crowder, his contract is up. Isaiah McKenzie, it's a 2-year deal. Like there are contracts coming up. I think Khalil Shakir could develop into the long-term slot receiver for this football team, but that's not a need right now.
No, it's not a need. And like, if Shakir doesn't get playing time this year, it likely means that the rest of the team has performed pretty well. So have to think of it that way. And yeah, this is an interesting tidbit. The Embedded did give a little nice nugget there, and Bean had said he would have taken Shakir if they did have their 4th round pick, which obviously would have been a late 4th rounder, but even still, they traded up in the beginning of the 5th again. So they really liked him. So it's just a bonus to me, obviously, that he's got that return ability, because it gives him another path to contribute on special teams. So I think he'll have chances. I think he will have opportunities, but I wouldn't expect I think it's unfair to think like, oh, he's going to come out and catch 40 balls as a rookie. Like that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a lot, right? Like that would be, I think, overestimate.